After 6 years of letting my daughter and her husband live in my house, they won a $4 million lawsuit settlement. That same morning, my daughter came downstairs in a silk robe I had never seen before, poured herself coffee from my pot, and told me it was probably time I found somewhere more suitable for a woman my age. I smiled. I asked her one question. "Sweetheart, did Wade ever show you the loan agreement he signed at my kitchen table 6 years ago?" Good day, dear listeners. It's Lily. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Please like this video, listen until the very end, and leave a comment telling me what city you're joining from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. I used to believe that an open door was a gift you gave without keeping score. I was right about the gift part. I was wrong about what happens when the people you gave it to decide they don't need the door anymore. My name is Rosetta Harbin. I am 67 years old. I spent 32 years as a registered nurse at St. Catherine's Hospital in Muncie, Indiana, and when I retired, I expected my life to grow quieter, not smaller. My husband Harvey and I had built a life in a yellow house on Birchwood Lane with a screened porch he'd framed himself over a long Labor Day weekend in 2003. He died of pancreatic cancer in the spring of 2017, and it was the kind of loss that rearranges everything. Not just the daily schedule, but the interior architecture of who you thought you were. I cried for the better part of 6 months. Then I stopped, because Harvey would have told me to. I managed alone for a year and a half after that. I had my pension, my neighbor Beryl, a container garden along the south fence, and enough sense not to confuse being alone with being helpless. Those are two very different things, and mixing them up has caused more grief for more women over 60 than I care to count. Then my daughter called in November of 2018. She and her husband Wade had been in Columbus for 3 years. Wade was what people charitably called an entrepreneur, which in practice meant he had a lot of ideas and inconsistent follow-through. He had been a mid-level manager at a software company called Arrowright Technologies before going out on his own. My daughter worked in marketing for a regional bank, steady and practical in the way she had always been when the decisions were hers alone to make. But they had gotten behind. A business account had gone sideways. There were credit card balances. They needed somewhere to land while they sorted themselves out. "Come stay with me," I said. "This house is too large for one person anyway." That was my first mistake. Not loving my daughter. That was never a mistake. The mistake was assuming that staying was a temporary condition. They arrived with 3 carloads and a rental trailer and turned the guest room into what my daughter immediately called their space. Wade seemed grateful at first, in the restless way of someone accustomed to moving forward who has been temporarily forced to pause. He used the dining room table as an office, spoke on his phone in low, urgent tones, and spent evenings researching what he might do next. 2 months after they moved in, he told me about his idea. A consulting firm, he explained. Technology assessments for mid-sized companies. There was a real market for it, he said, and he had the relationships from his years at Arrowright. What he needed was startup capital. Enough to incorporate, build a basic website, cover 6 months of operating expenses while he brought in his first clients. He needed $80,000. I want to be honest about what happened next, because honesty is the only thing worth offering at this point in the story. I did not simply hand it to him. I sat with Harvey's desk drawer open for 3 days, looking at the life insurance documents, and I thought about what Harvey would have said. Harvey had liked Wade well enough. He'd once mentioned, quietly, that the man had a habit of spending other people's faith in him, like it was a bank account with no bottom. But my daughter looked at me over the dinner table with an expression I had not seen since she was 9 years old and terrified I would be angry about something she had done. She was not asking me to fix anything. She was asking me to help. There is a difference between those two things, and I have always been susceptible to that difference. I agreed to the $80,000, but I was a practical woman, and I had spent 3 decades watching families navigate money and what it did to them at their worst. I drafted a loan agreement, 1 page, typed on Harvey's old printer. The terms were simple. $80,000 at 3% annual interest to be repaid when the business became profitable, or within 10 years, whichever came first. Wade read it, made a small joke about his mother-in-law being the most organized person he'd ever met, and signed it. My daughter signed as witness. I put the agreement in a plain manila envelope in the bottom left drawer of Harvey's desk, filed it under H for Harbin, the way Harvey had filed everything in his life. Then I largely forgot about it. That is also true, and I think it matters. Wade Incorporated. He brought in clients. Within 2 years, they moved into their own apartment and paid me a modest amount each month toward the household costs they'd used while they were here. Not a repayment of the loan, no one discussed the loan, but a gesture. I accepted it in the spirit it was offered. We had Sunday dinners every few weeks. My daughter rearranged my kitchen once without asking, and I moved things back without saying anything. It was manageable. It was family, or what I had come to understand family to mean. Then in the spring of 2024, Wade received news that changed everything. It turned out that when he'd left Arrowright Technologies 6 years earlier, the remaining founders had forced him out in violation of his equity agreement. He had retained an attorney, quietly, without mentioning it to me. And after 2 years of litigation, a judge ruled in his favor. The settlement was $4.2 million. The week after the ruling came through, I watched my daughter transform. Not into someone I didn't recognize, but into someone whose actual shape I had only glimpsed in pieces over the years, now visible all at once. She moved through my house with the brightness of someone who has spent years quietly measuring her options and is finally done measuring. She talked about properties. She talked about investments. She used the phrase "our future" so often that I began counting it, and noticed that not one of its uses included me in the picture. I watched all of it from my kitchen table with my morning coffee. I said nothing. That is something nursing had given me. You learn to observe before you intervene, because intervening at the wrong moment is often worse than waiting. Then came the morning it happened. It was a Thursday in late May. I was at the kitchen counter, slicing peaches from the farmer's market when my daughter came downstairs in a silk robe I had never seen before. She poured herself coffee from my pot and stood at the counter for a moment, without speaking, the way she had always stood before delivering news she had already decided on. "Mom," she said finally, without turning to look at me. "Wade and I have been talking." She paused. "I think it might be time for you to consider somewhere more tailored to your needs. There are really lovely senior communities out toward Greenfield. Some of them have gardens, activities, nursing staff on site. We'd take care of the costs, of course." She paused again. "I've already looked at a few places. I can send you the links." I set down the knife. I looked at her back. She turned. Her expression was not unkind, which was almost worse. It was the expression of someone doing the reasonable thing. Someone who had thought it through very carefully and arrived at great reasonableness and expected to be thanked for the clarity. "This is my house," I said. Something moved across her face. Then she straightened her shoulders. "The settlement changes things for us, Mom. We want to build our own life now. We don't need to depend on anyone anymore. You've been so generous, but a fresh start is best for everyone, and you'd have people around your own age." She walked out of my kitchen. My kitchen. The room where Harvey and I had eaten toast every Sunday morning for 23 years, where I had taught my daughter to make pie crust the winter she was 14, and she had talked the entire time about a boy at school who didn't know she existed, where I had sat alone the morning after Harvey's funeral and decided I was going to keep living. I stood there for a long moment. Then I smiled, because my daughter had made one assumption I had not corrected, and she didn't know it yet. She had assumed I'd forgotten about the drawer. I walked down the hallway to Harvey's study. I opened the bottom left drawer of his old roll-top desk. Behind a folder of utility bills and a rubber-banded stack of Christmas cards, there was a plain manila envelope labeled H in Harvey's handwriting. I had not opened it since the day I filed it. The loan agreement was inside, exactly as I had left it. Wade's signature in blue ink. My daughter's signature as witness, the date, the amount. $80,000 at 3% annual interest. I did the math on a notepad from Harvey's drawer. 3% of 80,000 is $2,400 per year. Over 6 years, that was $14,400 in interest. Total amount owed $94,400. Nearly $95,000. Never repaid, never offered, never, it appeared, thought about at all. I sat in Harvey's chair and let myself feel what I actually felt, because I think that kind of honesty matters. I was afraid, not the sharp fear of a crisis, but the dull, grinding fear that anyone over 60 understands. The fear that the world has quietly reorganized itself around you while you weren't paying attention, and that the people best positioned to help you have decided it isn't their job. I was 67 years old. I had a pension and a paid-off house and a 2016 Buick with a wobble in the front right tire. And the two people I had sheltered and lent nearly $100,000 to had just concluded, with tremendous reasonableness, that my presence was no longer required. I made myself think practically. Nurses learn that, when the situation is threatening, reach for the facts. Fact 1. I owned this house. The deed was in my name alone. Harvey had made sure of that when he updated the will after his diagnosis. No one had asked me to sign anything. No one had the legal right to remove me from it. Fact 2. I held a signed loan agreement for $80,000, plus 6 years of accrued interest, totaling just under $95,000. Wade had signed it. My daughter had witnessed it. Fact 3. Wade had just received $4.2 million. I put the agreement back in the envelope and put the envelope in my cardigan pocket. I went to the bathroom and washed my face with cold water and looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. I was not a woman who had ever needed rescuing. I did not intend to start now. I picked up the phone and called Beryl. Beryl Oakes had been my neighbor for 19 years and my closest friend for most of them. She was 71, drove a pickup truck, grew sweet corn in raised beds along her back fence, and had zero tolerance for people who dressed cruelty up in reasonable language. She answered on the second ring. "Rosetta, you never call before 9 unless something's wrong." "Something's wrong," I said. I told her everything. The settlement, the silk robe, my daughter's reasonable voice, the senior communities with the links she was going to email me, the envelope in Harvey's drawer, the math on the notepad. I spoke evenly, the way I had learned to report difficult things to attending physicians. When I finished, Beryl was quiet for a moment. "Do you have a lawyer?" "Not since Harvey's estate. My brother's daughter works with a contract attorney in Indianapolis, young woman named Abigail Carver, sharp and doesn't let things drag on. Can I call her today?" "Yes," I said. "And Beryl, don't say anything to my daughter or her husband." "I was a charge nurse for 11 years, I said. "I know how to keep information where it belongs." "Good. Come for dinner tonight. I'm making chili and I want to hear what you find out." 2 days later, I drove to Indianapolis. I told my daughter I was visiting a friend from my nursing conference years, which was close enough to something plausible that I felt no real guilt about it. She was on a video call with a real estate agent when I left, walking through virtual tours of properties she was clearly already imagining as hers. Wade was in the backyard on his phone. He raised 2 fingers in a wave as I backed down the driveway. Abigail Carver's office was in a low building near the Canal District. She was 36, methodical, with the particular calm of someone who had seen a great many stories about money and family, and was no longer shocked by any combination of the two. She offered me water. I put the loan agreement on her desk, along with the wire transfer confirmation I'd found in my own files, showing the transfer of $80,000 from my account to Wade's business account in early 2019. She read the agreement carefully. She asked several specific questions. Had the agreement ever been modified? No. Had any payments been made against the principal? No. Had either party ever acknowledged the debt in writing or in any recorded conversation? Not to my knowledge. Did I have reason to believe the document would be disputed as to its authenticity? No, both signatures were present, and the document was dated and clear. She set it down. "This is a valid and enforceable contract," she said. "A signed loan agreement with a witnessed signature and documented wire transfer is legally binding in Indiana. The absence of repayment demands over 6 years does not void it. The statute of limitations on written contracts in this state is 10 years. She looked at me. "You're well within your rights to pursue this." "What do I do first?" I asked. "First, I send a formal demand letter. It gives them 30 days to respond with a repayment arrangement or dispute the claim. It establishes the legal record." She paused. "They will know, once this goes out, there's no quiet version of this." "I know," I said. "Are you ready for that?" I looked at the agreement on her desk, that one page of thin paper that had sat in a drawer for 6 years without anyone asking about it. "I taught middle school for 1 year before I went into nursing," I said. "I can handle a confrontation." She began typing. The demand letter went out on a Tuesday afternoon. I drove home in the late light with the windows cracked, past fields just beginning to show their summer green, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not anger, something steadier than either. A clarity, like the first breath of cool air when you step out of a hospital after a double shift. My daughter was waiting in the living room when I arrived. She was holding her phone, and her face had moved past upset into something colder. Wade stood near the window. He looked the way people look when they've received news that has structurally altered a room they thought they understood. "We got a letter," my daughter said. "I know." I sat down in Harvey's old reading chair, brown leather, which my daughter had twice tried to replace with something more contemporary. I looked at both of them. "That money was a gift," my daughter said. "You gave it to Wade. You never once mentioned repayment. In 6 years, not once." "There's a signed agreement," I said. "It was in your father's desk. It has your signature on it as well." The color changed in her face. I watched the precise moment she remembered, sitting at that kitchen table and signing a piece of paper she had since stopped thinking about. "Nobody treated it like a real loan," Wade said carefully from across the room. "It had an interest rate and a repayment term," I said. "That is generally what distinguishes a loan from a gift." "Mom," my daughter's voice dropped, "you're upset about last week, and you're using this to retaliate." She paused. "We have very good attorneys now. They will argue the agreement was made informally, emotionally, under conditions that don't constitute a binding arrangement. They can make this very complicated for you." She let that breathe. "Or you drop the claim and we help you find something beautiful. We've already looked at places. There's a waterfront condominium in Sarasota we thought you'd love. 3 bedrooms, fully in your name. No strings attached." The room was quiet. Outside, a car passed on Birchwood Lane. I thought about the word strings. I thought about what it would mean to accept a condominium from my daughter as a settlement for nearly $100,000. I thought about Harvey at his roll-top desk, filing every document under its letter, believing that records were a form of respect for the future. "No," I said. My daughter left the room. Her footsteps on the stairs were fast and hard. Wade lingered. He looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on him before, something that knew it was in the wrong and hadn't quite finished deciding what to do about that. "I didn't think you'd kept that paper," he said quietly. "I keep everything in that drawer," I said. "Harvey taught me that." He went upstairs. I sat alone for a long time afterward. Let me be honest about what I found when I sat with it. I was frightened. The mention of making things complicated had gone exactly where it was intended to go. I was 67 years old. I had lent money at a kitchen table, informally to family, the way people do when they still believe that love and legal clarity are the same thing. A skilled attorney could frame that a dozen different ways, and not all of them would favor me. But I had the document. I had the wire transfer. I had Abigail Carver, who had said enforceable without hesitation. And I had Harvey, who had spent 40 years of his life proving that what you take care of takes care of you in return. I texted Abigail that evening. "They've been notified. Immediate pushback. possible counterclaim argument about the informal nature of the arrangement. She replied in 11 minutes. Expected, standard pressure, hold your position, call me in the morning. I put the phone on the charger. I looked at Harvey's photograph on the bookshelf, the one from the weekend we drove up to Lake Michigan in 1998, where he wore a yellow windbreaker 2 sizes too large and looked completely unbothered about it. I'm holding, I told the photograph. On Saturday morning, my daughter came downstairs and made pancakes. I recognized the strategy before the batter was mixed, not because I was suspicious by nature, but because I had been her mother for 41 years and I knew every version of her attempts at conciliation. She had made pancakes at 14 before asking to extend her curfew. She had made them at 26 before asking me to co-sign her first car loan. The pancakes meant she needed something to go her way and had decided that warmth was the better tool. She set a plate in front of me without preamble and sat down across the table with a careful, unhurried smile. I've been thinking about all of this, she said. We haven't handled any of it well. She folded her hands on the table. What if we started over? You drop the legal claim. We purchase the Sarasota property outright. Put it fully in your name. No strings, no conditions, no expectation of repayment from you for anything. A clean slate. I drank my coffee. And the loan agreement? She paused. We consider it settled by the property. I looked at her across my kitchen table, in my kitchen, in the house where she had stood on a step stool at age 8 to reach the counter while I taught her to crack an egg without getting the shell in the bowl. I'll think about it, I said. She nodded, quietly satisfied. She believed I would accept it. I could see that in the way she relaxed her shoulders when she got up to refill her coffee. I did think about it. I sat in Harvey's study that afternoon and thought about it seriously, the way I had been taught to think about serious things, by holding them at arm's length and examining every angle without letting feeling rush the process. Sarasota was warm. A waterfront property was objectively a good thing. $95,000 was less than the value of a 3-bedroom condominium by the water. But here is what I was actually being asked to accept. I was being asked to accept the premise that this house, this kitchen, this porch, Harvey had built on a holiday weekend. All of it was worth less than the inconvenience my legal claim was causing my daughter. I was being asked to treat the signed record of a debt as something to be quietly set aside, so that the story she told about this chapter could skip the part where she tried to erase what she owed, and her mother noticed. I put on my jacket and drove to Barrel's. She was pulling weeds along the corn rows. I told her about the pancakes and the waterfront property. She listened with her hands still in her work gloves, then looked up at me. What did Abigail say? Haven't called her yet. I wanted to call you first. Call her second. Beryl straightened. Then come for dinner. I have leftover chili, and I want you to hear yourself say out loud what you actually want, because I think you already know, and you just need someone to stop nodding while you say it. Abigail said what I expected when I called. An informal settlement reached under social pressure, without documentation of full repayment, leaves you with no recourse if the property arrangement falls through. The signed agreement is leverage. Don't surrender it for a promise. I held the course. The formal legal response from Wade's attorneys came 2 weeks later, disputing the enforceability of the agreement on grounds that I will not detail at length here, because Abigail dismantled all 3 of them in a reply that I read twice and found unexpectedly satisfying. The wire transfer was documented and predated the dispute. The witness signature was my daughter's. The terms were unambiguous. They requested mediation. We agreed. The mediation was held in a conference room in a building downtown. Beige walls, fluorescent light, a long table with plastic water bottles, and a mediator named Mr. Hendricks who wore bifocals and spoke with the measured patience of a man who had sat at the center of many family financial disputes and had long since stopped being surprised by any of them. My daughter and Wade arrived with their attorney. I arrived with Abigail. My daughter was dressed carefully in a gray blazer. She sat with her hands folded and looked at the table when I walked in. Wade looked at me once. I looked back. Their attorney argued that the loan agreement was a domestic arrangement made in a moment of emotional generosity, and that the 6 years' absence of any repayment demand demonstrated that neither party had treated it as an enforceable obligation. Abigail placed 3 documents on the table: the signed agreement, the wire transfer confirmation, a printed summary of Indiana contract law governing private written loan agreements. Mrs. Harbin documented this agreement at the time of transfer, she said, and she retained the documentation for 6 years. The absence of a repayment demand is not evidence that no debt existed. It is evidence that the creditor was patient. Mr. Hendricks looked at me. In your own words, Mrs. Harbin, what was your intent when you made this loan? Every head in the room turned toward me. I had thought about this question. I had turned it over every morning with my coffee for 3 weeks. My intent was to lend money, I said. The agreement says so. We signed it. I kept the paper. I kept the wire confirmation. I kept everything the same way my husband had kept everything in that desk for 30 years, because he believed that what you have is worth the effort of remembering. I gave my daughter and her husband a place to live for 6 years. I gave them $80,000 when they needed it, and asked only that they repay it when they were able. They are now able. I said it simply and without heat. That is what this is about. The room was quiet. Then my daughter leaned forward. Her voice, controlled all morning, slipped the last of its architecture. This is not what that paper meant, she said, and everyone here knows it. She is doing this because we asked her to think realistically about her situation, and she's treating it as an attack. She is 67 years old, and she is turning a kitchen conversation into a legal proceeding because her feelings were hurt. That is the honest truth of what's happening at this table. The room went very quiet in the way rooms do when someone has said exactly the wrong thing at exactly the wrong moment. Mr. Hendricks put his bifocals back on. He looked at the documents in front of him for a long moment. He asked 2 procedural questions, which Abigail answered. Then he closed the session and said his written finding would be provided within 5 business days. Wade's attorney spent 40 minutes on additional arguments, but the shape of the thing had already changed. We walked out into the corridor, and then the elevator, and then the parking lot, where the late afternoon was flat and cool, and the trees had that particular June heaviness. My daughter walked past me without speaking. Wade stopped beside me near my car. His attorney was already ahead of him. He waited until the man was out of hearing. I should have paid it back, he said, not as a prelude to anything, just as a fact, stated plainly. Yes, I said, you should have. He nodded once, and I believed him. Mr. Hendricks issued his finding on a Tuesday morning 5 days later. I was in the garden cutting back a peony that had gotten too heavy for its stake when my phone rang. Abigail's voice was even, professional, and underneath both of those things, quietly pleased. The mediator found in your favor. The agreement is determined valid and enforceable. Total amount owed with accrued interest, $94,450. They have 30 days to arrange repayment or face civil filing. I stopped moving, stood there with dirt on my gloves and the phone against my ear. What happens if they delay? They won't, she said. Their attorney knows where this goes if they do. Wade paid in full on the 28th day. I sat in Harvey's chair that evening with the payment confirmation on my phone, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not even vindication, something quieter. The feeling of a thing having resolved the way things are supposed to resolve when the records exist, and the documents are honored, and people are held accountable for what they agreed to. Which is not always how things go, but is, when it happens, a very particular kind of grace. I gave my daughter and Wade 60 days to find other housing. My daughter did not speak to me directly for 3 weeks after that. She communicated through Wade, who was courteous in the way of someone who has accepted a situation he can't change and decided to behave decently within it. On the last morning, he carried a box of my daughter's things downstairs and set it by the door. He looked around the entryway. The tile floor, the coat hooks, the small framed photograph of Birchwood Lane in winter that had hung by the front door since I moved in. "I appreciate that you didn't make this worse than it had to be," he said. "Thank you for paying," I said. I meant it without irony, and I believe he heard it without irony. He picked up the box. I stood on the porch and watched them drive down Birchwood Lane and around the curve where the road bent south, past the oak tree Harvey had planted the summer we moved in. Then I went inside. I put the kettle on. I was alone in my house, and my house was mine. Summer came slowly that year. I noticed it first in the garden, in the way I always notice things first, through something small and easy to miss if you're not paying attention. Beryl's tomato starts climbing their cages, the herbs crowding the pots along the south step. I stood on the screened porch Harvey had built on a Labor Day weekend 21 years ago and drank my morning coffee and felt something ease in my chest that had been tight for a long time. I had the porch re-screened that August. It had needed it for 4 years. The carpenter who did it said whoever built the original frame had known what he was doing. I told him my husband had built it in a weekend over a holiday while listening to baseball on a radio he'd set on a sawhorse. He said that was hard to believe. I told him Harvey had been stubborn about things that mattered. Beryl came for dinner the following week, and I made Harvey's pot roast recipe, which has never been fully written down because I believe some knowledge should require effort to carry forward. We ate on the porch with the screen door open and the late summer air coming in soft and green off the yard. Beryl said Harvey would have liked this evening, which was her highest compliment and one she did not give casually. "I think you're right," I said. She was going to Charleston in September and asked if I wanted to come. I said yes before she finished the question. We went. We walked along the waterfront, ate shrimp at a table with a harbor view, sat on a hotel porch in the evening, and talked about nothing of particular consequence. On the last night, Beryl said it was the first trip in years she'd taken without worrying about something back home. I told her I understood that feeling exactly. My daughter called in January. I saw her name on the screen and held the phone for a moment. Then I answered. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was smaller than I had heard it in a long time, careful in a way that was new. "Hello," I said. A pause, then, "I don't expect anything from this call. I just wanted to hear your voice." We talked for 30 minutes, her new apartment, her work, a dog she and Wade had adopted, a brindle mutt whose name I didn't quite catch. Before we hung up, she asked, "Are you okay there? In that house alone?" I looked out the kitchen window at the porch, at the oak tree Harvey had planted the year we moved in, at the garden waiting under the January ground. "I'm not alone," I said. "I'm home." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said quietly, "I know, Mom. We speak now every few weeks. Not the way we spoke before, with the weight of unexpressed things underneath every conversation. More carefully, more honestly, which is harder and also better. What was broken between us was not the love. The love doesn't break, not really, not when it has enough years behind it. What broke was the easier version of it. The version where we didn't have to say the true things, because we assumed the relationship was sturdy enough to carry the untrue ones indefinitely. It is sturdier when we say the true things. It turns out that is always the case. I planted tomatoes again in May. Beryl starts, same as every year. I put them in on a Tuesday afternoon and stood there afterward in the garden, with dirt on my hands, and the porch at my back, and the oak tree throwing its long evening shadow across the yard. I thought about the drawer, and about what Harvey had understood about keeping records, and about what that kind of foresight really is when you look at it honestly. It is not suspicion. It is not distrust. It is a form of love for the future self. A belief that she will arrive and that she will need to know what was true and that she deserves to have the proof of it, kept somewhere safe and labeled and ready to hand. I was there when the future arrived. I had the paper. That was enough. Whatever you're facing right now, Whatever door someone is trying to move you toward, whatever has been decided about your needs without your input, you have the right to open every drawer. You have the right to read what's inside. And you have the right to hand what you find to the right person and say, "This is what was agreed to. This is what I kept. This matters." What would you have done in my place? I'd love to know. Leave me a comment below and tell me what city you're listening from. Thank you, truly, for being here with me.